Okay, welcome to the final video in the series on the Germany paper for Edexcel. Today we're going to be looking at the hardest question, probably on all the papers actually. So the 16 marker, which is to do with the interpretation. So question 3D. And the key thing is that this builds upon the same topic and same interpretations that we saw in question 3B and 3C. And the topic remains consistent from 3A, B, C, and D. So this is why revision is really important for Weimar, because if you know quite a lot about a topic, you can really get top marks, especially if you combine that with good exam technique. Okay, so ingredients, as you can see, is very, very busy. So I'm gonna basically just highlight the key parts to you. So first of all, in your introduction, you need to say how far you agree with the question. So the question here would be, how far do you agree with interpretation two? You say how far you agree. And then you say which interpretation you find more convincing. Okay, please don't forget this. Okay, either say interpretation one or interpretation two is more convincing, but mention both interpretations. Okay, and then briefly give a reason as to why you believe that. Okay, again, I'll show you an example, and you'll be able to see this live in a second. But please make sure that you're explaining why you think the one interpretation is more convincing than the other. Then you need to give 3 PCAL paragraphs. PCAL stands for point, evidence, explain, own knowledge, analysis, and link. The analysis and link is combined, okay? So it looks a little bit more complicated than what it is. Basically, you start off with a point sentence, which links back to your overall opinion in the intro. You then give a piece of evidence, so that's a quote from the interpretation. Make sure you give a quote, okay? So don't paraphrase, just give a quote. Then explain what that quote means and how it links back to the question. Then back up that quote with 2 pieces of specific own knowledge which support what the interpretation is saying, okay? So let me add that in actually, which support what the interpretation is saying. Then write a mini conclusion or evaluation at the end of the paragraph. So that's the analysis where you would link back to your argument. So if you don't agree with that interpretation as much, you would then say, this interpretation was valid for this reason. However, the author has forgotten about this and is therefore not as important. Okay, so try and use like a bit of own knowledge to disprove the interpretation. If that interpretation is the one that you agree with more, then you're going to just basically explain and link back to your opinion in the intro. Okay, so that's a little bit easier to do. And then so that's the mini conclusion part done. In terms of your PCALs, your first PCAL should be on the interpretation in the question. So for R1, it's going to be on interpretation 2. The second PCAL should be on the other interpretation. And then the third PCAL should be on the interpretation you agree with more and pick a different quotation. Okay, that's really important. And then finally, your conclusion, you restate your overall position and say why. The key thing for this, guys, please, please, please don't forget this. If you don't mention both interpretations, you are capped at 4 out of 16. 4 out of 16. So you lose a huge number of marks. Even if you write a great answer, you are capped. Okay. All right. So let's say then, so this is the interpretations that we're going to be looking at. We saw these in 3B and 3C. So if you haven't watched 3B and 3C, you need to go and watch that before you watch this, because that's the order that you should be watching the videos in. But essentially, we saw that this first interpretation was all about the fact that Germans did not support Hitler. And then this bottom one is that most Germans supported Hitler, okay? Or most Germans conformed with it at least, right? That was the key difference that we picked out, okay? So the one interpretation is saying that the Nazis were unsuccessful in gaining support from the people, and the other interpretation, so interpretation 2, is saying that the Nazis were successful in gaining support. Okay, so in terms of the plan then, I'm going to argue, let's have a think about this. So this is what the question says. Whilst we're annotating the question, I can think about what my argument's going to be. So the question is, how far do you agree with interpretation 2 about the extent of support for the Nazi regime in the years 1933 to 39? Okay. So I'm probably going to argue that I agree more with we'll say we agree more with interpretation 2. Okay. The reason why I probably do that is I will say that the extent of opposition to the Nazis is actually quite small. Okay. Yeah, so when it talks about here, it talks about foreign radio stations and listening to American swing music. That those the examples of groups that they're talking about there, so the swing youth, they have very few supporters. So I would say that although there was opposition, it wasn't like widespread. Whereas for the second part is genuinely correct, like where it talks about 4 million new members. We know that to be true because like the Hitler Youth, for example, has 8.5 million members at its highest point. Okay. Right. So that's basically what I'm going to be arguing. Let me just rub that off. Okay, so let me just go back to this. Right, so paragraph one, so PCal one always has to be the one on the question. So that's going to be on interpretation two. PCal two has to be on the other interpretation. So that's going to be interpretation one. And then PCal three is back to interpretation two again. Okay. So that's essentially what we're going to do. For interpretation two, the quotes I'll pick out. So the first quote I'm going to pick out is going to be the German people clearly conformed. That is what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to talk about their Nuremberg rallies and films in Nazi society. For the interpretation one, the quote I'll pick out is widespread complaining. In fact, yeah, so I'll do, in fact, many Germans did not conform, and I'll put dance to American swing music. So I'll put many Germans did not conform. And then if you want to do a quote from later on, the way you do is you just put ellipses in like that. And then I put while others listen to foreign radio stations or dance to American swing music. Okay. So I talk about there, and then my knowledge to support that would be, even though I'm going to disagree with it, my knowledge to support that would be Swing Youth, Edelweiss Pirates, and yeah, those would be my examples. My counter examples would be the fact that the Nazis make a big push on radio. So the fact that they make sure that radios, 70% of homes have radios, and they encourage that. And radios are used for propaganda. And I'd also talk about the fact that the swing youth, swing and pirates have low membership. Okay, and interpretation two, you pick a different quote. So you're going to write another paragraph, but you pick a different quote. In the exam, if you're running out of time, just make sure you've got PCal 1 and PCal 2 done. PCal 3 is it's not optional. Like if you want the top marks, you do need to do it. But if you are running out of time in the exam, you can still get a very, very solid mark without it. Okay. So PCal 3, my other quote I'd probably talk about is a flood of people also joined other Nazi organizations. And then that one I can easily bring in Hitler Youth. Okay. So Hitler Youth, I'd be talking about 8.5 million. I could also talk about League of German Maidens. If I wanted to, I could also do like I could also talk about the strength in the economy. So I could talk about the strength through joy scheme if I wanted to. So the KDF. I wouldn't have to. I'll probably just do Hitler Youth and League of German Maidens, but that's how I do it. Okay, so let's write this answer then. So we'll start with the intro, and then I'll show you the paragraph. So, okay. All right. So let's start then with the introduction. So I'm going to start by saying, in this essay, I strongly agree with the argument of interpretation two, which suggests that the Nazis commanded a large amount of support in German society. Although interpretation one is correct to identify some opposition to the Nazis. This opposition was usually small in scale and did not pose a threat, whereas key Nazi organizations grew rapidly in the years 1933 to 39, meaning interpretation 2 is more convincing. Okay, so again, think about the ingredients. So I'm then in red, I am stating my opinion. I'm then recognizing the other interpretation here. And then my key thing is, this is my argument. So this bit I'll put in like a gold color. So that's the most important part. I'm giving my argument straight off the bat, okay? So then I move to PCAL 1. So I start by saying, so this is my first one, interpretation 2. So I'd start by saying one reason why interpretation 2 is more convincing because it talks about the amount of support the Nazis had across, so from people throughout society, from all walks of life. Okay, remember as well, to make your life easier, always try and pick your quotes from like the top, middle, or bottom. So my quote here is going to be the one at the top. So from 1933 onwards, the German people clearly conformed and became devoted to Hitler. It says, and you can use the same quotes that you've used in question 3B and 3C. Sorry, not 3C, you don't use the quote, but in 3B, when you talk about quotes, you can use the same one. It doesn't matter, okay? The questions are marked independently. So if you feel like using the same own knowledge as in 3A, or the same quotes as in 3B, doesn't matter. They will not take marks off you, okay? So I'll say it says, from 1933 onwards, German people clearly conformed with the Nazi regime and became devoted to Hitler. So this is proof that this quote tries to capture, so I'm then I explain the quote. This quote tries to capture the amount of support the Nazis had across society, and the fact that people were devoted shows how committed people were. From my own knowledge, and again, I'm using the same knowledge that I use for the through question 3A here. So I know that the Nazis enjoyed large support on their rallies, such as the 1936 Nuremberg rally, which was attended by, was it 250,000? I'm pretty sure 200, which was attended by, crowds of over 200,000 people. Okay. Furthermore, the Nazis delivered their message to the people through films which were widely viewed. Between 1933 to 39, 300 Nazi films were published, or not published, were made and were viewed by over 250 million keen Nazi supporters. Okay. So then I would say this evidence proves, or this evidence confirms interpretation two's argument that the Nazis had support from from the majority of German society. In fact, let me put it from the vast majority. Okay, I'm then going to say, then I'm going to do my analysis, but because I kind of agree, it's going to be a little bit easier to do the analysis here. So I'm going to say, given that they had so much support, this interpretation is more convincing than interpretation 1. So notice how I'm talking about the other one. Is more convincing than interpretation 1 because it is clear that the extent it's clear that who's the author of interpretation two? It's clear that Gallately has given an accurate picture of the amount of support, of the sheer extent of support Nazis. So you just link back to your overall opinion, okay? It's giving an accurate picture of the sheer extent of support the Nazis had, and that people were, and they are right to point out, and the evidence and the rallies and films confirmed Gallately's point that the German people were truly devoted and committed to Hitler's ideologies. You could also talk about propaganda in this one. I'm not going to though, just because you wouldn't have time to in the exam, but you could have done propaganda as your own knowledge. So here's my argument quote. So in red is my point sentence, in green, sorry, in blue is my evidence. Then my explanation is in green. Then my own knowledge is in yellow. Oh, and the next sentence as well we're doing. Okay. And then the last part is my analysis. Okay, my analysis and link. So notice how I'm linking back to, yeah, so given that there's so much for so I'm going to go, therefore, this is like the link. So therefore, interpretation two is more. Okay. So then I do the next one. Okay, so then I'm going to start by saying, some people may agree. No, in fact, should we start with, although interpretation one is not as convincing, it is partly correct to identify when it identifies there was opposition in German society. And then let's give the name of the author. So Epstein argues. And remember, we don't talk about who the historian is or anything like that. You don't do provenance for historians. So Epstein argues that, copy this, so that many Germans did not. That many Germans did not conform. Others listened to foreign notices, so I don't see American. This argument focuses on the opposition groups to the Nazis and how they try to, and how they are proof that the Nazis did not have much support. I know that there were some significant threats to the Nazis from the swing youth and Edelweiss pirate movements, which boycotted the Hitler Youth and instead promoted an American themed lifestyle, with the swing youth focusing particularly on black jazz music from the United States. Okay. In fact, let's change focusing to celebrating, particularly or listening to black jazz from the United States. Okay, the reason why black jazz music is important is because obviously Hitler was incredibly racist. So the fact that they'd be listening to black jazz music and enjoying it, that would not have sat well with the Nazis. Okay, so there is my evidence to support. So here is where I'm going to do my analysis now. And you're probably thinking, well, have you done two pieces of evidence? Swing Youth and Edelweiss Pirates, those are two separate pieces. Okay. And here I'm going to then do my analysis and say, however, Interpretation one is not that convincing because it fails to recognize, use that phrasing, it fails to recognize that the opposition Hitler faced was often very small in scale. Hitler and the Nazis faced was often very small in scale. For example, the Edelweiss pirates only had 2,000 members, which was far smaller than the number in Hitler Youth. And neither the pirates or swing youth, so the pirates or swing youth uh, posed a uh, posed a violent challenge to Hitler's. Therefore, interpretation one is less convincing. Okay. So in red, we've got our point sentence. In blue, we've got our evidence. Try and mention the name of the historian as well when you're writing your answer. So there we go. Own knowledge. And then notice, guys, how large the analysis is on this paragraph. So it's a bit more detailed. Okay, final PCAL, and then we are on to the conclusion. So say, another reason why interpretation two is more convincing is because the author recognizes the importance of Nazi organizations. Okay. And then we'd want to talk about the interpretation states other people also run other Nazi organizations. This suggests the Nazis not only were able to pack out their rallies, but were so popular that people were consciously willing to join the were consciously willing to join Nazi organizations. Okay, right, and then I say this is confirmed by my own knowledge, as I know that the Hitler Youth at its highest point. I want to go to this part. So I'm going to talk about Hitler Youth at its highest point has over 8.5 million by 1939. Its highest point had over 8.5 million members. Had over 8.5 million members, and the League of German Maidens under Gertrude Scholz. See how specific I'm trying to be with the evidence? It was also very popular. Okay, so that's basically my own knowledge. My value, if you really wanted to shut my argument down, the counter argument to what I'm saying is the fact that it had become mandatory to join the Hitler Youth. All right, from 1936 onwards, it was mandatory. So that number of 8.5 million is actually a bit phony. Like it was mandatory to join. I'm not going to say that because that would destroy my argument, and I don't want to destroy my argument at this point. Yes, so I'm going to say, therefore, interpretation. Therefore, this proves Gallately to be correct. As am I spelling that right? Gallately. Yeah. Correct as it is clear that the Nazis had support from the majority, as these statistics prove that the Nazis that Nazi organizations were massively popular. I'm going to say this makes interpretation 2 more convincing than interpretation 1, because the size of the Hitler Youth is far larger, or sorry, was far larger than the 2000 Edelweiss pirates, which and the small swing youth movement. I don't actually know the figure off the top of my head for swing youth. That interpretation 1 references. Therefore, interpretation 2 is more convincing. In fact, I don't even need to say that because I've already talked about that. So again, point sentence in reds, quote in blue, explanation in green, own knowledge in gold, about evaluation analysis in purple. Okay, and I'm gonna do a conclusion. So in conclusion, remember, if you're running out of time, just leave PCAL3 out, okay? And make sure the conclusion is in, okay? No matter what you do, make sure you got a conclusion. But in conclusion, interpretation 2 is more convincing than interpretation. And no, when you say, in fact, why we in conclusion, I strongly agree. Hang on, have I not done that throughout this? Oh my God, okay, I made a mistake here. So we've done that there. So we should say one reason why I strongly agree that interpretation 2 is more convincing is because. So in conclusion, I strongly agree that interpretation 2 is more convincing, as I strongly agree that interpretation 2 is more convincing, as Galati is more historically accurate. Use that as your sentence starter for your conclusion. The Hitler Youth statistics from the Hitler Youth, the rallies and German film, and sorry, Nazi film, Nazi cinema, proved that the extent of support was widespread for the Nazis. Epstein is right to identify opposition to Nazis, but he let's see, but they exaggerate the importance of this, given how small the Ada was. Pirates instantly feel. Therefore, interpretation 2 is strong. So that's basically, you just restate, you consider both interpretations. Just in case examiners at any doubt by this point in time. Okay, so you consider both interpretations. You do that throughout. You say how far you agree throughout. You do evaluation throughout. And that's basically how you answer that question. I hope that was helpful. In terms of recommended orders for the exam, you should be doing questions 3A, B, C, and D first, then do question 2, then do question 1. Okay, that's the recommended order. Right. Thank you very much for listening and for watching. I hope you found it helpful, and I will see you all in. Well, that's actually the last video. So, yeah, I hope the exam goes well. Cheers.